Roger Ebert watched more war films than most people ever will. One recreated a battlefield so realistically, actual veterans walked out of the theater. Another was banned for exposing a war crime they wanted buried. These are the World War II films that Roger Ebert called the greatest ever made. This war drama is based on real events, following Jewish prisoners at Auschwitz who were forced to help the Nazis operate the gas chambers. In return, they got a little more food, slightly better living conditions, and 4 extra months of life. And in the final days of the war, when survival started to seem like a real possibility, 4 months could mean everything. So, what do? Do you refuse? Or do you take whatever chance you can get? The film is inspired by the real-life prisoner uprising at Auschwitz in 1944, when the Sonderkommando managed to blow up 2 of the 4 crematoria. Because those ovens were never replaced, lives were saved. But others were lost as the Nazis used torture to find out how the prisoners got their hands on gunpowder. Roger Ebert called this the most immediate, unblinking, and painful Holocaust film he had ever seen. And he was right. It is a film about making choices that seem to make no difference, about attempting to act with honor in a closed system where honor lies dead. This one needs no introduction. Spielberg's opening sequence alone, the landing at Omaha Beach, is one of the most brutal war scenes ever put on film. This wasn't about glory. It was about terrified, seasick soldiers being thrown straight into machine gun fire when most of them had never seen combat before. The scale of this thing was massive. That opening scene cost $11 million to shoot. It used up to 1,000 extras, including members of the Irish Army Reserve. And to make it as realistic as possible, 20 to 30 of those extras were amputees, given prosthetic limbs to play soldiers losing their arms and legs in the gunfire. Roger Ebert called it a powerful experience. He said Spielberg knew how to make audiences weep better than anyone since Chaplin in City Lights. Some war films are about the battles. Others are about a single quiet moment that changes everything. Goodbye, Children is one of those. It's based on director Louis Malle's own childhood memory, and it takes place in a Catholic boarding school in Nazi-occupied France. The story follows a boy who doesn't think much of his new roommate, but over time, they become friends, until the boy realizes the truth. His new friend isn't just another student. He's Jewish, and he's in hiding, and then Nazis show up in the school. Malle carried this memory with him for decades, and when the film played at the Telluride Film Festival, people saw him crying in the audience. It never left him. The story follows Bruno, an 8-year-old boy growing up in Nazi Germany. When his father gets reassigned, the family moves to the countryside, where Bruno meets a Jewish boy on the other side of a barbed wire fence. The two become friends, both completely unaware of what's really going on. This is one of the most well-known World War II dramas out there, and also one of the most controversial. Roger Ebert, though, saw something else in it. He wasn't looking at it just as a Holocaust film, he saw it as a warning. He pointed out that while nothing since has matched the scale of Nazi Germany, history keeps repeating itself in smaller ways. Genocides, mass killings, entire wars built on propaganda. To him, the movie wasn't just about the past. It was about a system of thinking that never really goes away. If you've never heard of this one, you're not alone. Saints and Soldiers is a small-budget indie war film, and it does a lot with very little. It's based on real events. The Malmedy massacre in Belgium, 6 months after D-Day. Nazis opened fire on a group of surrendered American soldiers, killing most of them, but 4 managed to escape into the woods, and the movie follows their desperate attempt to make it back to Allied lines. The film was shot in Utah, using reenactors to play the German soldiers, and despite the low budget, the director, Ryan Little, made it work by focusing on character and story over spectacle. And that's what Ebert appreciated about it. He said, "Saints and Soldiers could have been made in 1948. That is not a bad thing. It has the strengths and the clean lines of a traditional war movie without high-tech special effects to pump up the noise level." Roman Polanski's The Pianist is one of the most powerful Holocaust films ever made. It's the true story of Władysław Szpilman, a Polish-Jewish pianist who survived the war by sheer luck and the kindness of strangers. At first, his family believes the war will end quickly, but then reality sets in. Soon enough, the film becomes a harrowing story of survival, hiding in the ruins of Warsaw, scavenging for food, avoiding capture, and relying on a handful of people who choose to help him. Polanski himself is a Holocaust survivor. As a child, he escaped from a ghetto after his father pushed him through the barbed wire. He spent the rest of the war wandering through Krakow and Warsaw, kept alive by people who took him in. That personal connection is what makes The Pianist feel so deeply personal. It doesn't turn survival into a triumph. It presents it as what it was: random, fragile, and deeply unfair. In 1940, about 15,000 Polish officers were rounded up, taken to a forest called Katyn, shot in the back of the head by Soviet forces, and buried in mass graves. That's the simple truth. But for decades, no one was allowed to say it. At first, when Poland was occupied by both the Nazis and the Soviets, the whole thing was buried in silence. Then, the Nazis uncovered the graves and blamed the Soviets. After the war, when Poland fell under Soviet control, history was rewritten again. This time, the official story was that the Nazis did it. And for years, if you lived in Poland, you had to go along with that version. The director, who, by the way, was one of the greats of Polish cinema, had a very personal connection to this story. His own father was one of the officers executed at Katyn, and now, decades later, he made this film to finally tell the truth. But even in 2007, that truth was still controversial. When Katyn was released, Russian state-controlled media tried to bury it. Major Russian TV networks refused to air it. Theatrical screenings were rare. A few independent cinemas in Russia showed it, but without promotion or state support, most people never even had the chance to see it. Tarantino doesn't make normal war movies. Inglourious Basterds isn't about realism, it's about movies themselves. From the title, lifted from a 1978 B-movie, to the Morricone-style score, to the way it's all centered around a movie theater, this is pure Tarantino. Roger Ebert loved this one. He called it big, bold, audacious, and said it was the kind of movie that just stays with you. And yeah, Tarantino completely rewrites history here, literally giving World War II a different ending. As Ebert put it, for once, the bastards get what's coming to them. Clint Eastwood made Flags of Our Fathers as part of a two-film project about the Battle of Iwo Jima. This one tells the American side of the story, while Letters from Iwo Jima explores the Japanese perspective. This film isn't just about the battle itself. It's about the aftermath. The story follows the soldiers who raised that famous flag on Iwo Jima and how their image was turned into propaganda. Eastwood doesn't go for hero worship here. He's more interested in what happens after the war, how soldiers are used, how they're forgotten, how the reality of war doesn't always match the myth. The battle scenes are brutal. Roger Ebert called them lean, violent, horrifying, and the way Eastwood shoots them, cutting between intense close-up combat and sweeping aerial bombardments, makes the whole thing feel massive but deeply personal at the same time. Originally, Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers were supposed to be one movie, but Eastwood realized that telling both perspectives, American and Japanese, in the same film wouldn't do justice to either side, so he split it into two. The battle itself was hopeless for the Japanese. They knew they were going to lose. Their mission wasn't victory, it was just to hold out as long as possible. Most of them were never supposed to make it home. Eastwood talked about how that realization shaped the film. He said, "What must it have been like to be one of the defenders, knowing you weren't going back? What a difficult request to make of people." Even after all these years, Eastwood still sees this as one of the films he's most proud of.